Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of The Complete Works. I'm your host, Doug Hess. If you're tuning in to Complete Works for the first time, welcome. A little bit about what we do here on this podcast is we discuss a specific movie each week from a film actor, actress, director, or composer's film history, and we're currently working our way through the Nicolas Cage series. Right now, on this episode, we are going to be looking at the movie A Score to Settle. And we're going to be discussing it, talking a little bit about some trivia, some box office success or lack of, the cast, and really jump into the film and take a look at A Score to Settle starring Nicolas Cage. Now, if you'd like to find out more information about the Complete Works podcast, you can just go to film-book.com. Again, that's film-book.com by using the search term The Complete Works. You can also email us at podcast@filmbook.com with the Complete Works in the subject line, or you can put in there A Score to Settle. We'd love to hear from you. If you like what you hear in the podcast, please hit the subscribe button. So every time a new edition or a podcast is available, then we can make sure that that is delivered directly to you. Like I said, we're going to be talking about A Score to Settle this week in the podcast. As we do every week, what we'd like to do is start off a little bit of trivia for this movie. Like I said, it's starring Nicolas Cage. And Nicolas Cage learned to play the piano for this role. And this movie was initially supposed to be shot in Vancouver, Canada, during the month of February in 2018, but changes to the shooting location took it to Cincinnati, Ohio, and then again it was changed and was sent back up to British Canada for the final shooting of it. Young Frankie is played by Bailey Coppola, who is the son of filmmaker Christopher Coppola. Christopher Coppola and Nicolas Cage, who was born Coppola, Nicolas Coppola, are sons of Francis Ford Coppola's older brother, August Coppola, and Bailey is Nicolas Cage's nephew, hence the starring resemblance in the show. The screenplay was written with the title Old Men originally. So when it comes to some box office information here, worldwide gross was only about $171,000. The runtime on this movie, Score to Settle, is 103 minutes. It was rated R, or is rated R, I should say, and the release date was August the 2nd, 2019. Let's talk a little bit about the cast that's in Score to Settle. As I mentioned, it's Nicolas Cage. He plays Frank. We have Benjamin Bratt, who plays San Quentin, and Noah Lee Gross, who plays Joey, or Frank, Nicolas Cage's son in the movie. We also have Ian Tracy, who plays Tank, Sean Owen Roberts, who plays Trip in the film. A little bit about who directed the film. That is Sean Ku. Hope I'm pronouncing that right. In terms of that, something that's really interesting, I want to talk about the director here real quick, Sean, in this particular movie. This is really only his second full-length feature film. He has done 4 other shorts and some TV films, but really, Sean is, we'll say, is a rookie. I want to save some stuff for my thoughts about that later in the show to wrap it up. But Sean is the director of the film. He also was one of the writers, along with John Newman in there as well. In terms of that, a quick plot line or a storyline, if you will, when it comes to the movie. Nicolas Cage is an ex-enforcer for a local crime syndicate who has vowed to enact retribution on his mob boss after 19 years of wrongful imprisonment. The only thing diverting his violent plans is a newfound relationship with his beloved son, Joey, is his son's name in the movie. So that's kind of gives you a quick overview of the movie, A Score to Settle. Like I said, in this particular film, Nicolas Cage has been, he's an enforcer for the mob's syndicate. He's been sentenced to 19 years in prison. So, as you can imagine, he's released from prison after serving, like I said, 19 years stint without so much as a courtesy visit from any friends or families. So, Frank, played by Nicolas Cage, has only one thing on his mind, and that's really getting revenge against his old former capo, Max. He's still enraged about taking the rap for a bloody and brutal murder that took place, that the actual Bob Moss committed against a rival Oregon gangster. This is actually forcing Frank to not admit, but abandon his young son in return for a sizable pay out. And unfortunately, a lengthy prison sentence, like I said, 19 years. So once Frank is released, he's back on the street. He meets up with his son, Joey, who is a recovering junkie, but still has, I should say, is still the last person he cares about in the entire world. In terms of that, you can see Frank is sick, very sick, and before he catches up with his old crew, including Max's enforcer Q, Jimmy, and Tank. He even may drop dead from a fatal form of insomnia that drains his vitality and causing painful hallucinations. Now, one thing I will just stop there before I describe any more about the film. When it comes to the insomnia, I thought it was one part of the film that actually slowed the process down. It was almost, in my personal opinion, it looked like Nicolas Cage was part of The Walking Dead in terms of that. And I would say that that was one of the negative parts of the film. It really just brought it down, slowed it down. I understand that it's building a character, but in a sense, it really, in my personal opinion, slowed the film down. Okay? So, first, though, he has to attain his necessities. So Frank has to go out and he starts digging up his cash or his stash that he has out in the woods, which is nearly about $500,000 in cash. Then he also has to go out to the black market, make sure that he purchases weapons, checking into a fancy hotel with Joey so they can get reacquainted with the good life. Of course, he has $500,000 that he has, so he wants to show his son a good time and try to make that amends after being gone for 19 years. So with no leads on where Max's whereabouts might be, so Frank goes and pays a visit to Q, one of his Max's acquaintance, who claims he's going straight after opening up his own bar and says Max has actually died a few years ago. He suffered, I believe it was a stroke. Spiffed up in his new suit and sporting an expensive watch, Frank relentlessly carries on his search for the rest of the gang, trying to track them down. Tank and Jimmy have a violent interaction when he suddenly turns up the lead indicator that Max is actually still alive and not dead, as Q had originally said. This, as you can imagine, has a mental and a physical condition, is rapidly deteriorating for Frank, jeopardizing his plans for retaliation and maybe his life as well, as Frank presses on to a fatal showdown with Max. Really nothing new in this film. And what I mean by nothing new is everything is expected, just like you would expect in terms of this. It was expected, is what I'm trying to say. Nothing that was shocking or a new twist or a turn. It was really predictable throughout the film. That's not necessarily a bad thing, and I don't mean that as necessarily a negative, but it was something that I felt kind of slowed the film down a little bit. Now, we talked about John Newman, who was one of the writers with Sean. to me, it felt kind of like a muddled script a little bit that was out there almost from the start. Um, we kind of see Nicolas Cage's character, like I said, kind of sleepwalking through the film with this insomnia. To me, it actually slowed the film down in terms of everything. I also thought that it kind of jeopardized the relationship between Frank and Joey, his son that he hadn't seen in 19 years after being in prison, and nobody had came and seen him. In terms of that, um, a couple other things that I would want to say about the film is obviously Nicolas Cage is an experienced actor, Academy Award winner. Honestly, at times I didn't really feel that in this movie. I thought that it was what felt like is a B movie. To be honest with you, that Nicolas Cage just made the film, got paid in terms of that. So that's kind of a harsh review. Like I said, it was only 103 minutes in length. However, I will say on the flip side of it, so that's kind of a first look, negative side of everything. Now let's step back and maybe take a more serious, realistic look. What I mean by that is this was clearly a low budget movie, and it was a B movie. I don't think anybody can get around that fact. However, like I said earlier in the show, in the podcast, that Sean, this was his only second full featured film. He had done about 4 other shorts and some TV. So he's not an experienced director on the big screen just yet. But I also want to be fair to Sean and believe that he really did a pretty decent job for being what I'm going to refer to as a rookie filmmaker. So put that in perspective. He needed to work a little bit, and I say he, meaning Sean, needed to work a little bit on directing his cast, except for Nicolas Cage. The reason I say that is obviously Nicolas Cage is a professional performer, for lack of a better word. He's an Academy Award winner, and so Nicolas Cage knows how to act, knows how to get the best out of his characters. I thought he did a decent job in this film, but it was the supporting cast that maybe needed a little bit of extra work on this. And then we want to look at, so that's kind of the director's side part. Then we want to look at John Newman, who was one of the writers along with Sean. We want to also take a little consideration that this is only his second full length feature film as well. Were there some plot issues in the film? Absolutely. I think part of it was the slow pace that was out there. So you have 103 minutes in length, but it was slow in a lot of spots. Really, you didn't even see any fight or true action until the second half of the film. The first half was completely slow. There was a lot of time spent in the fancy hotel trying to get that relationship between Frank and Joey. And when you do that, I think it was just a little bit too long. Some of those scenes could have been cut down, shortened. And I understand why the director and others were trying to go for a longer 103 minutes. You don't want to get it too short, then you become a short film instead of full featured. I get it. But I would also argue that maybe the script needed to be tightened up a little bit. And again, that's not a full criticism of John Newman. Like I said, this was only his second featured film. So I think he's going to get there. He's a little green. But he's going to get there as a writer in terms of that. So overall, was it a horrible movie? No. Like I said, there were spots in the film that I thought was slow and dull. I've seen worse movies, so I'm not going to give it a low number. such as a 2 or a 3, but I also don't think it was a home run either. I don't even think it was a triple. It wasn't out of the park or anything like that, using some baseball analogy. I would give it more of a 5 on a scale of a 10. So it was kind of right there in the middle. Like I said, some of the action scenes were cool. The concept was decent, but it was predictable. It was something that I think the audience it's not going to be surprised at when they see it. So it wasn't something that was going to jump out there and grab your attention. But at the same time, it wasn't the worst film. So I'm going to give it a 5 out of a 10. In my opinion of A Score to Settle, starring Nicolas Cage. I want to thank everyone for listening for this episode of The Complete Works. You can definitely find out more work on film-book.com. Again, that's film-book.com. You can search Doug House. You can search The Complete Works. You can also find me at Twitter at HessDoug14. Again, that's HessDoug at 14. If you're listening on podcasts or on iTunes or another podcast service, please rate and review this episode. If you're listening to this podcast on the YouTube channel, Facebook projects, or podcasts, I should say, FilmBook Podcast, please like our video, subscribe to our channel, and leave us